So far, we have looked at language, where while talking about various aspects of language and its generic features, by now, I was trying to make you see a particular point about language, which is it's more like a continuum than like definite numbers, for a particular reason that there aren't boundaries, specific boundaries defined. At one place one stops and then the other begins. Okay? Now, one can ask a question, is this completely unfair to count languages? Well, that is also not completely unfair, because at one point on the same continuum, two languages or okay, let me put it this way. At two different points on the same continuum, if we think language is a continuum, things do sound very different, right? Sometimes so different that they are mutually unintelligible. Therefore, it's okay to count them as different numbers too, as long as we understand that in some places on the same continuum it might be difficult, or languages share lot of things with one another. As long as we understand these things, we are fine. Then we also started talking about two different aspects of language study, that is, the two different approaches through which language is studied. One is language purely as a phenomena of human mind, and the other is language, the use of language in actual world, real societies. These are two different ways of looking at language. We started looking at some of them, and we will go into more details along these two lines, where we will be focusing largely on language as a phenomena of human mind, which is I language. Some of other things, just to refresh ourselves and to help you keep these things in the mind all the time as part of generic understanding or general knowledge about language, that it is the most sophisticated product of human mind. What could be other products of human mind? If we say this is one of the most sophisticated products, it assumes that there are other things. Other things may not be as categorically a product as languages are, or languages. When we say most sophisticated product of human mind, we refer to other kinds of activities that human mind performs, right? And in such activities, it has a specific distinction. Okay? We will also go through lots of specific details where we don't claim that we are studying human mind per se, but we will see how studying language helps us study human mind. Lot of scientists have studied human mind from different perspectives, biologists, neurologists, neuroscientists. In fact, beginning from ancient time, and philosophy to mathematics to life sciences, this part of a study, this part of scholarly endeavor to study human mind, that is the functioning of human mind, has been one of the real goals of many types of studies. Nobody as of now conclusively claims that they have figured out this thing. However, the pursuit is on. Do you know, people studying actual physical properties of human mind have concluded that there is nothing inside it. Do you know about this position? Are you familiar with people who have studied physical properties of human mind? That is, when they have opened it up, they found there is nothing inside it. Okay. Now, on a lighter note, that sounds not just hilarious, but it is consistent with what people have, from ancient time people have been calling, if they find somebody who doesn't understand much, they say he has an empty brain, right? He has an empty mind. Actually, human mind is empty. There is nothing in that. Now, that part is just a side comment. However, what is interesting about it is, if there is nothing to see, then how does it do all kinds of complicated computation? Is this question clear to you? When you open up any machine, a motor engine or this kind of a machine, you find lots of circuits, lots of complicated machineries, units in any one of them, in all of them. However, there is nothing in human mind, at least there is nothing visible. Then how does it function? Do any one of you know how it, one of the ways, one of the things available in human mind helps it coordinate its functions? No? No? Okay. Have you heard about neurons? Right? What are they? What is that? What is that? What are neurons?
Brain cells.
Brain?
Cells.
Not really cells, but, well, if we are not particular and technical in terms of definitions, we can say that how many of them are there in human mind? Right? And then people studying neurons claim that specific set of neurons are assigned specific activities, and then they report to one another, and then to the larger units, and then to the larger units, and they are also assignments in a way that they can perform multiple actions at a time. Therefore, while we are doing other things, we are either aware of things happening or we can perform multiple activities, right? Now, so that's one part of it. Yet, we do not know if there is a set of neurons assigned to language. Okay? We know, or at least we believe, that there is a set of neurons assigned for carrying information all over the place, telling us information about environment around us, and thinking, seeing, moving, motor coordinations. Probably there are things for that. There are specific set of neurons assigned for that, but we do not have evidence if there is a set of neurons assigned for language. Okay? That's one point. And remember, I don't remember whether I told you this thing in the last class or the class before. There is still a discussion going on about language being coded in human genes. So these are hypothetical questions that scientists are working on. We do not have evidence for these things as of yet. So this is what we mean when we say it's one of the most sophisticated product of human mind, and we call it product because otherwise to study human mind we need to look at its physical properties. However, if you look at the structure of human language, then that leads us to the study of human mind as well. sometimes when it is difficult to study the powerhouse, probably looking at the product can help us understand where it's coming from. Okay. So, that way studying structure of language, particularly human language, and trying to find out its underlying system helps us understand human mind. That is, if the underlying system of language is such that we are underlying system of language is designed in such a way, in such a complex way, then this must not be this must not be a product of an ordinary activity. And that way backward we look at human mind, and then we say studying language helps us understand performance of human mind as well. Okay? When we look at the specific aspects of language and its complexities, I will remind you time to time with reference to why it is called I language and what it refers to when we say I language, and then how complex a phenomena it could be. Okay. In terms of e-language, when we look at it, it seems to be a very powerful social tool. We have talked about the spread of language, 6,800, 1650 in India, and then how language and continuum that we discussed, and just I told you about it, that it's difficult to count, and how it is how it can be looked at in both ways. How language becomes part of identity of human beings as a group, as society, or as an individual. Sometimes it's more it's stronger than religion and other aspects of life, and things like that. Therefore, it's undoubtedly a very powerful tool as well, besides being a systematic, besides having an underlying system which is purely, sometimes when you look at its structure, you will see it's purely mathematical in nature. Okay, we'll look at the mathematical part again when we are looking at specific structures and at all levels of sounds, words, and sentences, more so at the level of sentences. And another interesting aspect of language is, which also we have briefly discussed, we are going to go into the details of that as well, that when it comes to learning of a language, and here by learning I refer to learning of language as a child, learning of language in a natural environment, that is not in a classroom setting, and we are talking about forced language. All these terms, forced language, natural environment, are technical in the sense of a study of language. We will look at those terms as well. What I want to underline here is, when we look at learning of language, we end up concluding that it happens in such a way that we don't even realize what happened. And before you realize, you end up speaking a fully developed system which we call grammatical sentences in a normal setting, and which enables us to communicate with one another in a nice way. And at that stage we say now the child is linguistically adult, and which happens, do you have any idea when it happens? When do you think a child starts speaking a good grammatical sentence? 4 to 5 years? Yeah, that's simple. So by the age of 4 and 5, a child becomes linguistically adult in a very strict sense, that by adulthood we do not mean a discussion on nuclear science. What we only mean is a good sentence. A child can convey you simpler things whether it wants water, food, it has pain, it's not, a child wants something, the child can talk in a normal way, and then that kind of thing continues and we reach different levels. So this is what we mean, that we learn it without putting any effort. And even as an adult, you want to go back and see, which people have done in a systematic way, what does really happen when a child really begins speaking such a complicated system by the age of 4. What could have happened? We can only say that it happens. We don't really know what happens. Okay? And I'll show you some of them as well. And you know these things, we have just been talking about it, that it's a rule governed system and it's the strongest marker of society, culture and identity. A few words about culture. I'm not sure if we get to come back to this thing, or when we are looking at sentences, I'll refer back to it a couple of times. The only reason why I'm bringing culture in it, most of the time in a class on principles and parameters or about I language, people would want to stay away from this term, because they only want to look at language as a phenomena here. They only want to look at the mathematical properties of language, that is, its combinatorial capabilities of how words combine as sentences and what are the underlying rules in it. I am bringing in here this term culture to prepare you for looking at in a little bit more serious sense of the term culture, and which is the following. When we acquire language or we continue enriching it, acquisition of language does not take place without acquisition of its cultural components. Okay? There are a lot of things that are embedded in language which are attributed to its cultural components. Okay? And a speaker of a language, by a speaker I mean native speaker of a language, does not learn such things as specific additional instructions. They grow up with such things the way they grow up speaking a language. Okay? For example, if we have to say someone died, right? There are various different ways of saying the same thing in different languages. And because I need to move to a different thing, I'm not giving you specific examples, but you understand what I am saying. Now, nobody tells you which one is appropriate in which circumstances, right? But you know that, right? How can we talk about it without giving you an example? Can any one of you give an example? What are the terms for death? This may not be a great thing to talk about early in the morning, but nonetheless, when this has come up as let's talk about an example. Give me just 2-3 terms, and that could be in Hindi or any other language. Anybody?
You say serenity for death.
Okay. Sorry?
Serenity.
Which refers to?
Serenity or serenity.
Okay.
I mean, that's generally associated with death. Right?
Okay. No, that's not what I am referring to. I'm referring to different words for death in a particular language. For example, I can give you 2 from Hindi. Marana, Mrityu, Dehant, and some of the derogatory ones. The moth is not a derogatory one. Okay, all right. Even these 4-5 of them, right? When we want to talk about somebody, in a more dignified and respectful way, which one would you prefer? If we need to say, let's talk about the recent one. I don't want to use the example of Mahatma Gandhi. Let's talk about the recent one, or for that example, Mahatma Gandhi. Do we say Mahatma Gandhi की मृत्यु हो गई, or we say Mahatma Gandhi मर गए? Which one sounds better? Why?
Respectable. More respectable, sir.
The other one has little bit of the other one is little bit marked, right? And there are more derogatory ones than that, which we do not use in a specific situation. So all I am trying to tell you is we don't learn these things. We are not given a list of words for different situations, and then we are never told, either in a classroom or in any other form in society, that use this one for this situation. And everybody agrees on which one should be used in which situation. For example, when I gave you this example, I think all of you agree that one is marked over the other, right? This acquisition does not take place in a instructional way. Therefore, we can say that cultural components of language also takes place at the time of its acquisition as a systematic phenomena, as a rule governed phenomena. All right? Fine. And this is why we say language is a child's play. Really, it's a child's play because children perform much better than adults. And here I have a reference to it means more when you compare it with second language acquisition. So every time we talk about a child, we mean first language acquisition, and every time we are talking about adults, we are talking about second languages. So it simply means that if you want to learn a language, learning of language takes place in a better way when a child learns it. However, as an adult, when we try to learn a language, you know what happens. We can learn a little bit here and there. We can go all the way very close to native-like competence. We can say that near native competence, but we never depend on such competence. What we depend on, or what makes us a native speaker of a language, is the situation when we have learned, we have acquired a language as a child while growing up. Okay? That is what it means. And the last one, language is a special purpose cognitive ability, is also related to the first one, and it's related to what we started with, language as a sophisticated product of human mind. For example, when you look at other things, like let's say swimming or riding a bicycle, okay, or okay, let's take just these two examples. There is a role of practice in these things. The more you practice, a better swimmer you become, right? The more you practice, a better cyclist you become. And there are lots of other activities where, which is cognitive ability. For example, singing. The more you practice, a better singer you become. Okay? Such activities are called general purpose cognition. Language is called a special purpose cognition because there is absolutely no role of practice in language. Learning of language does not take place through practice. And I'll come back to this and emphasize this more, and I'm only underlying this right now for you to think. Lot of times we are made to believe that we learn language also through practice. The more we practice, the better we perform in language. Now, we can accept the role of practice in learning a language when it comes to second language to some extent. In acquisition of first language, the role of practice is 0, and I say it with responsibility, it's 0, absolutely no role of practice. A simple argument is, if we learn a language through practice, then we would learn only the words that we have heard. We will be speaking only the sentences from our languages that we have heard before. However, as a native speaker of a language, irrespective of which one you speak, you have capability to speak a sentence that you may not have ever heard before. In other words, you have capability to speak or understand any word, any sentence of your language, whether you have heard them before or not. You get this thing? This argument alone completely rules out the possibility of practice in learning language, and therefore language as a cognitive phenomena of human mind, as a cognitive ability, is special in the sense that it's different from everything else human mind performs. There is a role of human mind in singing, there is a role of human mind in swimming, cycling, everything else, but the role of human mind in learning a language is way different from learning anything else. There is one more distinction which is quite obvious, which is all other things that we have just mentioned, like swimming, riding, singing. You perform better at these things when you grow up. Your ability to perform at these things develop or increases when you are growing up. If you look at language, it decreases. The more you grow up, it decreases. Why that happens? There is a theory for that, not assumptions, and I'll take you through that as well. These are again, I have just put them as a list here. These are the things which we have discussed. 6,800 languages, 1,652 in India, which is approximately 25% from 5 different language families. Some of these things also we have discussed, and I'm just adding couple of them as new fact here. Languages of the world have limited sounds. They have sounds in a limited number. That is, no language goes beyond 50 or around 50. Okay? All of them will share sound with others. That is, there is not going to be a language which has completely distinct set of sounds from other languages. Okay? And again, this has reference to language continuum. The closer they are on the continuum, higher the possibility of sharing larger number of sounds. Okay? The farther they are on the line or the continuum, lower the possibility of sharing many sounds. Okay? So it's no mystery that Tamil and Telugu will share more sounds than Tamil and Assamese, or for that matter Tamil or French. Okay? This is no mystery. Geographical proximity, geographical coexistence, and mutual existence help you conclude that these languages will share more sounds. However, what is more interesting is, no matter how far apart languages could be, it just does not happen that they don't share a sound or few sounds. All right? And here, once again, to underline that, it never happens that two languages will share just one sound for the sake of maintaining these rules. It's not just one sound. If if not too many, it's definitely a bunch of sounds, all right. And that also tells us, irrespective of geographical boundaries, language is definitely a phenomenon of human mind, and therefore human mind functions alike. This sentence should not be difficult for you to understand now, that language boundaries are porous. There aren't hard and fast boundaries between languages, and which is either consequence or which helps people communicate. When I say consequence, language being porous is probably a consequence of language sharing sounds, okay. Or we can look at it in a different way, which is they share sounds because they are in closer proximity and because they are porous. Now, when we are talking about set of sounds, all the sounds are not of just same type. Have you heard about these terms, consonants and vowels? Now, in the I don't need the definition from you. I only want you to understand it, because those definitions are not that relevant, or for that matter we'll talk about that, and we will spend a couple of minutes on that. But I want you to understand more fundamental stuff, and something which is more theoretical in nature. Now, in the set of sounds in a given language, again there is no language which has just vowels or only consonants. Whatever the number of sounds available in a language may be, that's going to be combination of both consonants and vowels. Can you guess why? Or can you guess what would be the result of it? If I can give you a hint, at the level of words, because eventually we make words out of sounds. So if we need both, and all the languages definitely have both sounds, both types of sounds. So what will be its consequence at the level of word? Any idea? Maybe you are thinking too hard, therefore you are not saying it. It's a very simple thing. No? Okay. Tell me what I am going to say is a consequence of that or not. If we have a word in any language, you cannot get a word only with consonants. Okay? If vowels are required in every language, then vowels are going to play a role in every word. In no language, you are going to have a word where there is no vowel. Pay attention to this carefully. You can have the reason why it was difficult for you to guess probably, and I am guessing about it, is you can have a word only with vowels. Okay? Therefore, we cannot say that all the words must have both consonants and vowels. Get it? We cannot say all the words of all the languages must have both. We can have a word in probably all the languages of the world only with vowel sounds. Okay? But there cannot be a word in any language of the world only with consonant sounds. Okay? While you are thinking about a word, on the basis of what I have just said, which sound is more fundamental? Consonants or vowels? Naturally, right? Vowels are going to be more fundamental, because now on the basis of this we can say there cannot be a word without a vowel. we can have a word only with vowels, we cannot have a word only with consonants, therefore, we cannot have a word without a vowel. Does that sound? Does it sound like something mathematical to you? Do you see some nature of mathematics in it? This is the underlying system of a language at the level of sound. And this is way too fundamental that I'm telling you, which is, see how this is organized at the level of sounds, that is, or at the level of words. No words in any language without a vowel. Get it? Now, at this note, can we quickly talk about the vowels and consonants very quickly, because I need to go to language and dialects. Very quickly, what do you think is a vowel sound? Or what do you think is a consonant sound? You may have heard these things, and when you hear these two types of sounds, you are told something along with them. And we are going to look at not exactly the definitions of these two types of sounds, but what they really mean in a little bit more detailed way. Not tomorrow. Tomorrow we will be talking about acquisition of language, but a day later. That will be next week. But today I just want to hear something from you about consonants and vowel sounds. What do you think is a consonant sound? No? You have heard these two sounds for sure, right? That there are some of the sounds that are consonants, some of the sounds that are vowel. Okay, forget about the definition or anything about both. What's the difference between the two? No? All right, think about them. I think I am taking you to way too fundamental level in the study of language, right? About sounds and its classical distinction between a consonant sound and a vowel sound. And yet, I want you to think. You not knowing this doesn't say anything about you. Trust me. It's really not saying that you don't understand anything, or you don't understand about sounds. Now, what I want your attention to is the following. A speaker of a language, we don't need to go to a laboratory to establish we speak languages or we speak language, right? But it's very easy on the basis of this example to conclude, when you speak a language, you definitely have that inventory of sounds of that language. Again, that inventory includes both types, consonants and vowels, right? Now, you know the consonant sounds and vowel sounds of the inventory of your language, right? But when you are asked, can you give me few vowel sounds? In a classroom setting, in an articulated way, it's difficult for us to even tell the distinction between the two. Hang on here, I'm not trying to make fun of it. I'm trying to establish a point, which is this capability that I know here refers to acquisition of language as what we know I language. Okay? And that is the capability which refers to what is called knowledge of language. And I come to this term again. At that point in time, it will be easier for you to see. And I'll give you tons of examples of these things, that language or the rules of language consist of rules that we all know, but we just do not know that we know them all. Like this particular example of distinction between a consonant and a vowel. Get this point? All right. So we'll come to more of such rules later, and please think about the distinction between two. Like I said, as a speaker of the language, we don't really need to know those rules. As a speaker of the language, we don't really need to know the distinction between consonants and vowels. But if we want to study them, there is a way to find out the distinction between the two. And I am not asking you to look them up in any books. I am only asking you to think about them. What could be the distinction between the two? And we will make them more obvious when we are talking about sounds. All right? Okay. And I'm leaving the last part of CV. CV simply refers to consonant vowel, and we will talk about these types of phonotactic rules little later. Now, we have discussed some questions like these before. So, keeping e-language in mind, where does one language stop and the other begins? We have looked at that, and it could be difficult. There are overlapping areas, and those overlaps are not ordinary overlaps. Those overlaps are not inconsequential. They have huge consequences in defining the language or understanding language either as a phenomena of human mind or as a phenomena of society. We'll keep looking at them as well. We want to look at today, where we didn't get to spend a little bit time on language and dialect. Okay, and I want you to understand this particular distinction in a little bit more technical way, and by technical I mean little bit more clearer fashion, which is the following. So these are the things that we hear when we say a word dialect. Whether we put them in these words or not, these are the things that we have in mind. These are different words under different bullets, but eventually there is a way to combine them all, and this is what we mean when we say dialect. All right? However, even more fundamental than this is when we say or when we talk about distinction between language and dialect, what we know to begin with, or what we assume, is language is something superior and dialect is something low. Okay? Nobody debates that. Just the two terms tell about themselves that one is higher, the other is lower. Okay? This is there like oxygen or blood in us. Okay? However, what I want you to look at is that's not true. We can understand them in whichever way we want. We can talk about them in different ways that we want, but that's not true. The moment we talk about up and low, we are talking about, and I want your undivided attention here, which is we are talking about language in society. We are not talking about language here. Okay? That is, I language, at the level of I language, there is absolutely no distinction between these two terms. Okay? Let me first show you some of these things, and then I'll underline I language again. Some of the things that you will find people telling you is languages have more number of speakers and dialects have fewer number of speakers. Now, if there is no distinction between the two terms at the level of I language, and what we mean by I language is the way we acquire language, right? Either two different varieties of language or two different languages. Okay? If we compare any language with Hindi, the total number of speakers is going to be lower than Hindi for any language, right? Does that make any other language dialect of Hindi? also, do people learn two different languages in two different ways when we are talking about learning of a language as a child? A newly born baby, and when it is growing all the way to the age of 5, either in the natural environment where Tamil is spoken or Telugu is spoken, or for that matter French, English or German are spoken, they acquire languages in the same way. If there is no distinction at the level of acquisition of language, how can we say that external factors will make a distinction in putting value judgment about the two? Okay? So, when we say there is no distinction between the two terms in a technical sense, we mean that acquisition takes place in the same way. That is, similarities or differences with other languages. If we call language A as language and language B as dialect, and let me give names here. Let us say, if we say Hindi is a language and Braj Bhasha or Awadhi are dialects of Hindi. Okay? What I am saying is, if Hindi is acquired the way, in the same way as Braj Bhasha or Awadhi, then how are they different from one another? They are different from one another, of course, at the level of numbers of speakers. But then in a scientific understanding of an object, the number of speakers would not make a difference. Get this point? Similarly, if there is literature available in a language and not in other languages, how does that make a difference between the two instruments as in the forms of spoken languages? It is just a matter of coincidence that in some languages we have written stuff, in other languages we do not, right. What is the language in which most of the books are written in our time? English, right. So, that simply means English is, we can associate different kinds of value judgments with English. It is more important, it is spoken in a much wider geography, it is spoken by large number of peoples. Can we say a language which is not spoken by same number of people, or there are not those many books written in languages like, let us say Hindi or Bangla or Punjabi, that they are not languages? That is not going to be true. So, defining the distinction between the two, namely language and dialect, on the basis of these terms are only superficial way of looking at them. That is the only point I am trying to make. I am not saying that languages with lots of literary volumes are no good. That is not the point I am trying to say. It is just a matter of coincidence that a language has lot of books written in it and the other language does not have it. A language may have too many people speaking it and the other may not have too many speakers. That would not make any difference at the technical level. At the same time, whether a language has a writing system or not, again is not important, because we have talked about this, that we can write any language in any script. It is only a way to represent sounds. Now, when we talk about English, we are more used to seeing the language English in Roman script. When we talk about Hindi, we are more used to seeing the language in Nagari script. That is all. It is a matter of getting used to. Now, if that did not exist, then at one level we can write any language in any script. Again, this is not I am not trying to devalue the significance of a script. All I am trying to say is any script can write any language. Therefore, again, whether a language has a script or not has nothing to do with its underlying system. Okay? and it will be clearer when we talk about its underlying systems of languages. Therefore, whether a language is lower or higher, it's decided on the basis of its socio-political status, and people start agreeing, right? Power structure is such that we agree to anything. Only in that sense people accept, okay, fine, what you are saying is, it must be true. One is higher language, the other is not so higher language, and this is so much in our system that we don't even need to say that, and we accept these things. However, at the level of its underlying system, acquisition and other technical aspect, there is no distinction between what we know or what we have been told as language and dialect. We will keep looking at these things more and more when we look at these systems. All right.